Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Trippett. I am the Front Porch Conservative. Welcome back once again to a session of Chattin On The Porch. It is Wednesday night, November the 1st. We have now entered Thanksgiving season, a time to count our blessings and recall where we have come from, which sort of gets to my guest tonight. We are on YouTube, we are on Twitter, we are on Rumble, all the fun places to be. If you're out there tonight and you haven't quite settled in yet, do me a favor. Send out a tweet, send out a Getter, send out a Gab, send out a Truth Social, send out a whatever. Tell your friends, hey, get in here because this one's probably going to be one of the more interesting sessions of Chatting on the Porch that you will ever be a party to. Again, my name is Brian Trippett. I am the Front Porch Conservative. And as we start to let everybody settle into the room, I'll start dropping the volume on the music and introduce our guest. And ladies and gentlemen, I am highly honored to have this gentleman here tonight because in a million years, I never thought he and I would be sitting down for a conversation, but I am so glad he is because we have certain loves of certain subjects, and I can't wait to get his take on certain things. As you all are no undoubtedly aware, there is an old saying that goes something like this: those who will not learn from their history are doomed to repeat it, which means that hopefully we all take a lesson from history and remember certain things so that we don't do them again, which for me means I have a genuine appreciation for history teachers, regardless of whether it's my old mentor in high school, Mr. Smith, or even my favorite college professor in undergraduate, the late Dr. Boyd C. Rist. And this man has no doubt earned the affection of many students down through the years and the decades. He earned a bachelor's degree in political science from Arizona State University in 1972, graduated with a master's in history in 1980 from the same institution. 1983, he graduated with a PhD in history from University of California, Santa Barbara. In 1985, he received an appointment to the University of Dayton, where he settled into his academic home for the next 31 years, retiring in 2016. Well, teachers don't really retire. They just maybe don't get a paycheck for it, but that's neither here nor there. Always politically active. He's very, very prescient in terms of his observations about American politics based on his understanding of American history. In 2020, he was appointed by President Trump to the board of directors of the National Board of Education Services, which advises the Department of Education's Research Division. He is probably one of the most prolific writers I think I've ever come across. If I took the time to list every article, journal, and book that he's ever been a part of, we'd be here all night and we'd never get a question in edgewise. But I will show you some of what he has been a part of over the years. A Patriot's History of the United States in its 15th anniversary edition and a #1 bestseller on the New York Times list. The Rhythm of History, an autobiography of his life recently published. And finally, A Patriot's History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline, which should be published early next year. Ladies and gentlemen, I could go on giving accolades about this man all night long, but I'd be depriving you of the opportunity to hear from the one and only Dr. Larry Schweikart. Dr. Schweikart, welcome to the Electronic Front Porch.
Hi, Brian.
How are you tonight?
Oh, all right. You know, that introduction reminds me, I've only been late one time for a speech in my entire life. Just before I retired, I agreed to do a speech at the Homeland Institute in Chicago. I drove from Dayton. It's a 4-hour drive, and there was an hour difference to my credit. So I had 5 hours to do a 4-hour drive, and I left an hour early. So I had 6 hours to do a 4-hour drive. And I was just sailing along, going to be there in plenty of time. And 8 miles outside of Chicago, I ran into a parking lot. Nothing was moving whatsoever on the freeway.
Oh, no.
And so it took almost 45 minutes to go 8 miles. And then I get to what's called Upper Wacker Drive, which is where my speech was. Now, people who aren't familiar with Chicago, they have Upper Wacker and they have Lower Wacker. Well, if you're in Michigan, you have the Upper Peninsula, which is up, and the Lower Peninsula, which is lower, right? And I just thought they were both on the same plane. But no, Upper Wacker was closed. So I had to go down to Lower Wacker, and traffic's moving like 50, 60 miles an hour underground, and the signs in Chicago are about the size of a football. You can't see anything. And I don't know where my turnoff is. And finally, I'm going to turn here. I turn, pulled into a garage, only to realize, now by the way, I'm 5 minutes from my speech. I pull into a garage and it says pay before you park. So I have to pull out and pull back in and pay first and pull back in. So now I'm officially 5 minutes late. I run outside and I darn near forgot to look at the name of the garage, which could be a problem in Chicago with a dozen high-rise garages. Some people forget their parking spot, but at least they know what garage they're in. So I saw a woman waving at me. Fortunately, I checked the name of the garage. I go in. Now I'm officially 10 minutes late, and the guy introducing me delivered a 20-minute introduction. So I had a grand total of 10 minutes for a 45-minute speech.
Oh, no.
So when I introduced a famous historian that later that year at the University of Dayton to one of our events, I said, ladies and gentlemen, this man has written such and such a book, and he's known around the world for his work on World War I, Mr. Blah, blah, blah. That was it.
Oh, no. Oh, well, hopefully I didn't take too long with my introduction and I did you justice doing it. So
You did.
I appreciate you being here, and so glad I see some familiar faces out there. One of your fans, definitely glad she's here. She's one of my favorites in my chat and on my everything else. Now she's saying I'm echoing. Good grief! Oh heavens to Murgatroyd! Don't know what's going on here. So anyway, we'll try and work out the technical stuff as we go. I want to thank you for coming on, because if ever there was a time when we need a historian's perspective on what's going on in the world, this is definitely it. But before we get to all that, I want to get to some of your background for people who may not be familiar with you. And I took the liberty of taking a look at your autobiography, and there's 2 lines from the first chapter that gave me pause, because I began to realize, here may be some of the origins. Talking about your father, there's a line that says, Earl was a voracious reader, and then a few paragraphs later, start out, the Schweikarts read to their children. Is this the origins of where you got your love for learning, your love and curiosity about life?
Yeah, Dad read, but he read Zane Grey novels, probably dozens of them. I don't ever remember him reading a nonfiction book. But growing up, I got the Dick and Jane readers. I got Highlights magazine, which was a kids magazine. I forget who put it out, but had all these stories in it. We had a variety of reading materials around the house for kids. Early on, after my dad died, my mother bought me a set of World Book encyclopedias, lots of pictures. And I would just go through those things from A to Z and read every single article. I just found them so interesting. So I've read a lot early on. I never read a lot of the classics. I tried Moby Dick and I got through the first part and the last couple of chapters, but all the stuff in between about how you hunt whales. But I read things called Classics Illustrated. And these were comic book versions of House of the Seven Gables or Last of the Mohicans that were beautifully illustrated and told a story. And you could go, yeah, I get that. I understand that. So yeah, I read all my life. I was a fast reader. And then when I got to college after 10 years in the rock band, I was way behind the curve. Because I was coming in later. I was like 27 or 28 years old coming into the graduate program. And the first class I took coming back to graduate school was speed reading. And that changed everything, because I could come home with a stack of books that high and finish them in a night.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I read those 2 lines and I was just like, yeah, it's from here that the love and the desire for learning starts. And I will, I'll go ahead and start setting up my next question. And we had talked about it backstage, but I guess some of the folks out in the audience are still hearing the same echo that you are. So I don't know if there's anything on your side, but if not, then I understand completely. But anyway,
anything else I can do with this mic.
Understood. We'll go from there. read something else in another publication. You graduated from high school. You enrolled in Arizona State University, but as opposed to history, which wound up being your occupational home, poli sci. So, what led you down the road to the poli sci degree as an undergraduate?
My stepfather at the time was a lawyer. I thought maybe I want to be a lawyer. And also, I was interested in politics. And I thought political science would give me the answers to all the political questions I had.
Okay.
Two things happened. One was it didn't, but two was I was playing rock and roll and I really didn't care very much by that time anyway. So
Okay. Well, and that sort of leads to my next question. Rampage. Now that's an interesting name for a band, but from everything I've read, your band opened for some of the best groups of its era. For example, Steppenwolf, Savoy Brown, the James Gang, Mother's Finest, a few others. Now, I have to admit, when I found out you were the drummer, I I- it I have an interesting theory about drummers, and you're at complete liberty to disabuse me of this notion or confirm my suspicions. But drummers have to be some of the most interesting people in the band. And this may not apply to you, so take it in the spirit in which I intended. But I've always found drummers to be like have interesting personality quirks. Some of them go wild to one extreme. Some of them
John
on the other.
Bonham.
Yeah, well, John Bonham, Keith Moon, others. And then there's some that's just very mild mannered, and they just sit back there, just playing the late Charlie Watts of the Rolling Stones. He just sitting back there, he just playing his drums, he's just happy as a clam, minding his own business. So tell our audience about Rampage. I mean, you toured for what, about 7, 8 years, if I read that article correctly.
My mother brought me up playing the piano, and I hated it. I just hated the piano, and the teacher I had would teach me Czerny exercises, which were various exercises to build finger movements and sight reading. But I never learned music theory. I never learned about augmented or diminished or minor or major chords or how to actually write your own music or anything, how to listen to a song and pick it up. I never learned that. And so I really hated piano. I always wanted to play drums. And then sometime about high school, she finally relented and said, okay, I'll get you a snare drum. And I ended up buying my own drums myself to make a set. And we used to have these things called record players. I don't know if your audience is familiar with these, but a record player had a spindle that stood up like that, and you would put several records on it, and it would drop one record at a time. And I would put on my Beatles records and sit there and play along with Ringo hours at a time. And Ringo was and remains one of the best drummers in the world. He can play any beat, cha-cha, rumba, slow blues beat, advanced rock, waltz, you name it, Ringo could play it. And many documentaries have been done on his drumming style and how different and unique it is. So I really learned how to play drums from Ringo. And so I played in the high school band. You know, we had the high steppers where they were right in front of you like that. And I ended up being section head of the high school band. I tried out for the Arizona State marching band. And boy, was that a wake-up call. I was in there with drummers that were 1,000 times better than me. And I said, no way, this isn't for me. But meanwhile, I had several groups. And literally, I went on the road with one group called Goldmine the weekend after I graduated from college. I graduated technically on a Friday, and on Sunday, we were in a van on our way to Peoria, Illinois. And for the next several years, I didn't get off the road very much. I was off and on. And I was different. I did not drink at all. I did not do drugs once in a while, but really not. And
It was the 70s. Who can say?
Yeah, I mean, compared to the rest of the guys, I was a Puritan, and they jibed me about it, but they weren't really mean or nasty about it. They kind of let me be me. And I quickly learned I needed earplugs because the guitar, the double Marshall stack, was right in my ear, and I was going to be deaf by the time I was 20. So a lot of those things kept me kind of sane. And like you said, we ended up marching our way kind of almost to the top. We were kind of almost famous, as that movie says. We were about one step away. We had recorded on our own dime 2 songs that got reviewed by Billboard, Cashbox, Record World, very good reviews. But we just couldn't get that one backer in the A&R guy who would give us that contract. And that's when the band fell apart for various reasons. The guitar player quit, and that was that. When I came back to Arizona, I was now older, and I got sick of auditioning with 15-year-old kids or 16-year-old kids. I said, now I'm going to do something else. And I thought I would teach high school during the day and play rock and roll drums in Phoenix at night. But to get a teaching certificate, I needed a course in U.S. history. And that's how I ended up going back to ASU. And in a 6-week summer class, the professor there caught my attention, and just within 6 weeks, I go, I want to be that guy. What do I have to do to be a professor?
All right, let me ask you a question, because you just sort of, and this is why I love having guests on like you. And I'm not just saying this as a suck up line. I mean this sincerely, because you sort of walked right where I was going to go. What was it in this 6-week class, or what was it about this professor that so flipped your switch that you're like, that's my life's profession? That's what I want to do. I found it. This is it. I'm going for it.
Well, first of all, Robert Lowenberg was a very, very conservative Jew, very conservative, and not quite with the dreadlocks, but not quite Orthodox, but almost. Okay. Second, he was very entertaining as a teacher in a kind of different way. And third, what he taught, he was supposed to be teaching American cultural history, right, in the age of Jack. We didn't do almost any chronology at all. It was all history theory, the theory of history. And he would include economists like Hayek and von Mises, and talk about political scientists like Strauss and Vogelin. And his hero was Harry Jaffa at the time, who'd written this killer book called Crisis of the House Divided about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And he taught from such a different perspective. It would be like if you sat through a concert of Bob Seger and just straight ahead rock and rollers like that, right? Mm-hmm. I can't think of some others off the top of my head, but just very straight rock and rollers. And then all of a sudden you hear yes. And you go, whoa, I want to do that. And so that's how I ended up. And like I said, I had terrible grades. And I told him I want to get a degree in history. He said, I'll vouch for you. So he got me into the graduate program. And within a year, I was getting straight A's. And I had written an article that won the national prize for best article in history by a graduate student within, one semester being at ASU. And they go, I guess we'll keep this guy. And the next semester, I wrote under another professor a second article that won the best paper in the country. Nobody else has ever done that. And I did it twice from at the time, little known American university called Arizona State. And then they did me a big favor. They said, dude, we're going to have to kick you out because we can't get you a job. And if you want to be a professor, you need to go someplace where the professors have more clout than our guys do. And so through Lou Tams, who was Reagan's ambassador to Columbia, he was an ASU guy teaching there. He got me into his alma mater, University of California, Santa Barbara. And I went over there and spoke with the graduate director. I said, look, I'm an older student. I'm conservative. I want to get my PhD and get a job. What do I do? And he said, I'm going to set you up with this one guy. He says he's not as well known as most of the other people, but believe me, he can get you a job. And he did. He got me a job on one phone call.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. Which now, if I read your biography correctly, before you wound up at University of Dayton, there was about a year. Now, is this the job you're talking about, or was it Dayton was ultimately the one that he was?
No, Wisconsin. He got me a job at Wisconsin.
Okay. Yeah, because I was wondering about that, and it looks like a lot of your fans are starting to show up. Here's a fellow that definitely is glad to see you. That's for daggone sure. Let me. So the year in Wisconsin, what happened that you either got the call or they said, Doctor Schweikart, we like you. Why don't you come over and teach a few classes for us? So how did that ultimately come about?
You mean in Wisconsin or at Dayton?
Dayton.
Okay. So the Wisconsin job was a 1-year job. It was really like a junior college, number
Okay.
one. Number two,
Okay.
it's cold as hell. We had 10 straight days of 10 below zero. I'm from Arizona, 120 degrees. This is like a 200-degree shift here, and I couldn't stand it. And so I interviewed at the historical conventions at Christmas, and I got two offers, or two campus invites. What they do is they invite you to campus, and you and two other candidates kind of give speeches and talks, and then they make the job offer to the one they like the most. So one was Dayton, and they offered me the job first, but the other one was Texas A&M, and I really wanted to go to Texas A&M, A, because it was warmer, B, because it had four other business historians. And when I came out with a PhD, my degree was in history, but it was really in economic and business history.
Okay.
So I'd done a dissertation called Banking in the American South from the Age of Jackson to Reconstruction. And so I looked forward to working with these four other business historians at A&M, and they were going to bring me in as an associate. Now, people who don't know the university system, you start as an assistant, then you get promoted to associate, and then you get promoted to full. Well, they were going to bring me in at step 2 with a big paycheck. And I'm going, yeah, I'm coming. And literally while I'm talking to the dean and he's making me the offer, he got a phone call from the president of the university. It says all hiring is immediately frozen because oil revenues have fallen. Texas funds all of their universities through oil revenues. So I
Oy
say,
vey.
here I come.
Mm. And 31 years of an absolutely glorious career. So let me ask you a question because I always find this to be interesting. Now, all the touring that you did may have offset this, but I always find it interesting when people from a certain geographic area of the country move somewhere else that's, I won't say foreign to them, but different. Now, did you go through much culture shock coming from Arizona to Dayton, Ohio? And if you did, what was it?
No, because I had spent that 1 year in Wisconsin.
Okay.
And I was at a campus of 200 students. The whole town was 2,000. At Santa Barbara, we had classes of 800.
Holy
So
cow.
it was just, we didn't even have McDonald's in that town. I had to drive to Madison to watch a movie or get a good pizza. I mean, it was really, we had 2 TV channels. So I spent my whole time there revising my dissertation for a book, which some
Sure.
people take years to do that. When I got out, my book was ready to go. So when I drove into Dayton from Wisconsin and I see skyscrapers, I go, oh, thank you, Lord. Because at least I knew I was in a bigger city to have a McDonald's and good pizza, right? But I have to say that, and Dayton is different. The Midwest is different because of the rolling hills and the grass and the trees. And Arizona is just flat. I can see 50 to 100 miles in the distance here in Arizona. It's just flat,
Yep.
and it's desert. So it took a little while to get used to that. I was used to winter by that time. But I have to say, at first, like most young Turks, I was hoping to stair step my way up to Harvard or Yale or something like that. And I was so fortunate that I ended up staying at the University of Dayton because they loved me and they protected me. I had, I think, 5 different chairmen, 1 chairwoman, and two chairwomen, and they all protected me, gave me the best choice classes, um, gave me research money anytime I wanted to go research something. I only had 1 student complaint in 31 years, and the chairman stood fully behind me and looked into it and said, "This person's crazy." And so it was just a great place to work.
Yeah, and you telling me your story about the University of Dayton, knowing, I mean, not that I'm that much involved anymore in academics, but I've heard all the horror stories about academic politics. It can be worse than what's on Capitol Hill. And if you went through 31 years and you only had one student ever complain on you, and you had 5 different department chairs and all of them had your back, brother, you were probably in the best situation. Do you know how many professors would envy what you had there? I'm
Yeah.
telling you, it's just amazing. And obviously you understand the importance of what you had, and made, like I said, I took a look at your list of things that you've written, either books on your own, books you've contributed to, journal articles you've edited, journal articles you've written, and I was like, Lord Almighty, this man loves to write. It's like, so I mean, was the writing part of growing up, or was the writing, some advice that your mentor at Arizona State gave you?
That's a great question. I wrote nothing in my life save one lyric to a song until 1977. Nothing.
Okay. Okay.
And Professor Lowenberg said, in no uncertain terms, if you want to be a professor, it's publish or perish. And so I made up my mind right away. Okay, I need to publish. And I made up my mind, secondly, that if I'm going to write something, it's going to be published. I'm not going to waste anything. I won't have several articles that I never got published. They're all going to be published somehow. And third, I learned how to take a book that I had written and to compartmentalize it into several articles. So I wrote Banking in the American South, but I extracted from that history of banking in Tennessee, banking in Alabama, banking in like 4 or 5 other state journals. And I got a very prestigious publication, the Journal of Southern History. So I probably got 8 or 10 publications just out of my first book, when many people will only get either a book or an article. And I said, no, I'm going to publish everything. And to this date, I probably published 70 to 80% of every single thing I've written.
Oh my goodness. That is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Folks, if you just happen to be dropping by the electronic front porch, my name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. This is Dr. Larry Schweikart, America's favorite history professor. And we're sitting around, got our feet up, drinking a cup of something. If you're coming into the room, before you totally settle in yourself, do me a favor, send out a tweet, send out a getter, send out a whatever, and tell your friends, get in here, because this is going to get real good, because we're about to slide our way into current events. Before we do that, I have to ask you, as an educator, and I guess this one gets a little more serious, how troubling do you find it, either among current college students of the day, or even leadership, be it political or otherwise, in our society, that there is a decided lack of understanding of either national history or world history in general that ought to inform our decisions?
Yeah, it's very bad. Starting around 1999, 2000, somewhere in that zone, I began to notice a serious deterioration of my students in terms of their writing, their ability to read assigned materials, their test scores. It was significant. And then about 7 or 8 years later, they made a strange turn. They were better, but they were far more cynical. They didn't care about anything. They could do whatever you told them to do, but they were only going to do exactly what they needed to do, not one step more. The whole notion that I grew up with, which is, of course, biblical, which is you do your very best in any situation. If you're, I cleaned toilets for a church for about a summer. Man, I had the cleanest toilets and the nicest bathrooms in the world out there. And I would always go above and beyond. You don't see that much in modern day students. It's only about how far do I have to get through the hoop to get to the next one. I don't want to clear it. I don't want to clear the bar by a lot. I'll never forget a fake telegram that John F. Kennedy read during his presidential campaign. And he pulled it out of his pocket, and it supposedly was from his dad. And it said, "Dear Jack, don't buy one more vote than is necessary. I'm not going to pay for a damn landslide." And I get, that's kind of the sense I get from the students, that they don't
Mhm.
want to do one thing more than is absolutely necessary. And very few of them see it as important to build in themselves that quest for excellence that is going to help them down the line, even if it doesn't help them right at that moment.
Yeah. I remember I have a for myself, I have a bachelor's of science in government and a master's of public administration, and I got my master's at University of Illinois at Springfield. And at the time, there was a professor out there who had graduated Syracuse, and I'm trying to think of the name of the business school, and that's where he got his PhD. I want to say Maxwell is the name of it. And I took my first exam from him. This was my very first graduate class, and it was a written exam. It was an essay exam. And for 45 minutes, I scribbled my heart out. And being a, I don't know, shall we say, overly conscientious, at one step short of bootlicking sort of a student, I want to know what I got on my grade. He said, "Well, you did well." He said, "But I can tell you, you went to a private university, not a public college." I said, "Well, how can you tell?" He said, "You can write, and you think through your writing." He said, "It's obvious." He said, "State schools don't produce this anymore. They don't know how to produce it anymore." So I can sort of relate to what you're going through, and you know, I mean, obviously, you're a far better student of history than I am. I love the subject. I think if I read it correctly, your area of specialty is 1800 to Civil War. Did I read that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. I followed in the footsteps of my favorite undergraduate professor. His love was Revolutionary period up to the age of Jackson. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, I love that period because that's where the intellectual foundations of the country get laid down. And by and large, they still inform what we do 200 plus years later. But obviously, that period that you love so much has just as much impact, particularly around the era of Lincoln. But to that and in that vein, current events and a historian's perspective is always appreciated in these moments. Let's talk about Ukraine for a second. We have, I shouldn't say we, yeah, we, the United States, have been into this thing now for going on a year and a half, well, 2 years, really, if you talk about the drumbeat of war that led up to everything that happened. And there is a word that, from my perspective, I think has been grossly disabused. And the two camps in the Ukraine debate come down to this: we've got to do something. We've got to defend Ukraine against Russia, yada, yada, yada. No, the other camp says no. There's not a vital national security interest. Why are we getting involved? You're an isolationist. I've got to ask you about this word. And again, d- correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember isolationism as being that era of post World War One. We had just saved Europe. We had, put the Germans in their place militarily. And the United States sort of went, okay, we've lost a lot of our men. We've lost a lot of what we are. Let's turn inward. Where and how did the word isolationism get turned into, if you oppose any form of intervention, you're a bad person? Am I wrong in how I'm seeing this? Because it looks like to me someone taken a word, totally twisted around its definition to apply it to a political end. Your thoughts?
I think it really took root after World War II. You got the term isolationism after World War I, but it wasn't quite as pejorative. The famous Lodge reservations about the Treaty of Versailles that
Mm-hmm.
said the U.S. will send an observer, but will not be a member of the League of Nations.
Right.
And the reason for this was obvious. We had never been involved in European affairs. Prior to that time, the Monroe Doctrine prohibited us, in theory, from being involved in European affairs. And we kind of looked at it like, you Europeans screwed up. This war shouldn't have happened. Now we're going to clean it up for you. Then we're going to leave and fix it this time. But then after World War II, with the advent of Marxist Leninist communism, you start to get isolationism as viewed as a real threat. Well, if we don't get involved to stop this, they are going to take over the world. And I do see a real difference between Ukraine with Putin invading and Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia or any of those places, Hungary, with the Soviet Union invading. And the difference is this: Putin may in his heart be a communist, but he doesn't act or talk like a communist today. He doesn't talk in terms of Soviet expansionism is going to control the whole world, that capitalism must fall. He didn't care about any of that stuff. In fact, Vladimir Putin, if you take his name off of it, you would think you were listening to, in many ways, Ronald Reagan from the 1980s. He talks about Christianity, he talks about family, he talks about faith, he talks about nationalism. And the zones in Ukraine that he is claiming, the Donbass, Crimea, others, are historically, depending on how far back you go, Russian territories. So, well, they've been Russian territories for 10 years. Well, okay. How far do you go back? Where do you want a whole group of people in your country that hate being there? It's sort of like the old thing with the Irish and the English in Northern Ireland. You know, do you want to be in a country that really doesn't want you there? So I don't see Putin's Russia as expansionist in the same way that the Soviet Union was expansionist in the 1950s and 60s. And for that reason, I think that Ukraine is vastly different than what idealistically we tried to do in Vietnam. You know, I was having this discussion with Rich Barris, the pollster, the other day. And if you think about the domino theory, Vietnam, as Lyndon Johnson used to call it, Vietnam was the second domino to fall. Laos had already fallen and Cambodia fell after that. So to an extent, the domino theory was correct. It didn't go further to Malaya. Why? Because the British had defeated a communist Malaysian movement. Took them 10 years, but they defeated it before Vietnam fell. So it was already kind of contained right there. But Leninist Soviet expansionism was ideological. I see nothing whatsoever ideological about Putin. Where I do see ideology at work is with Hamas and with the Islamo-fascist regimes out there who want to eradicate not just Israel, but everybody who isn't a Muslim.
Oh, and trust me, we're gonna get to Israel in just a second, but I've got to ask you one other question as it relates to Ukraine, and I've got an awful suspicion I know the why, but I can't articulate it in the absence of evidence. What is America, or let me rephrase that. What is the obsession with certain elements of American foreign policy intelligentsia? What in the infernal regions of Dante's hell is this obsession with Ukraine? Because I go, I mean, just speaking for myself, I go back to the days of Reagan. I can remember anytime Reagan did anything militarily, there were usually two sides of it, and one of them was Caspar Weinberger. And it used to terrify Caspar Weinberger, even though he was the Secretary of Defense. It used to terrify him, the idea of using U.S. military might. And his theory was you don't rattle the saber unless you're prepared to pull it from the scabbard and use it. But anymore in American foreign policy, you got, man, if our nose gets out of joint somewhere around the world, somebody wants to go send troops in, Lindsey Graham being the principal architect of that idea. What is it with certain people in U.S., either the Congress or in the foreign policy intelligentsia, that they are so obsessed over Ukraine?
Well, let's go back to Reagan for just a minute, and then I'll get to Ukraine. Okay. Reagan had, and I wrote a book on Reagan called Reagan, the American President. It's the most recent biography of Reagan. I use the Reagan archives at the Reagan Library more than any other historian out there, including Brands. And it's just deeply researched into those archives. Reagan had 4 points about committing U.S. troops. One, you had to have full national backing of doing it. That is, the public had to be behind such a move. Second, you had to exhaust every other alternative to keep from using force. That is, diplomatic, economic, whatever. Third, When you go in with both feet stomping. You just wipe out the enemy. You leave no room for discussion or debate. And 4, you have an exit strategy. And so I would argue that if George W. Bush had followed Reagan, he would have been seen as some kind of hero after going into Iraq, say, we got Saddam, we killed him. We couldn't find WMDs. I was wrong, but I had to take the chance because of 9/11. We're getting out, and pulled out in 2004 or 5. I don't think the residue of what came to be Iraq would have hung on him and the neocons like it has, because they just stayed and stayed and stayed. And the same thing in Afghanistan. Go in, try to kill bin Laden, get rid of the Taliban, as Obama used to call them, build a base in Bagram, keep it there, and get out with everybody else. So with Ukraine, what's going on? Well, we can't prove it because we don't have access to these congressmen and senators' finances. But I think any common sense person has to know they are getting kickbacks in the form of major investments in defense contracts, Lockheed, Raytheon, Northrop. And I like these companies. These are great companies. They're the backbone of the American arsenal. But you can't have your congressman being paid off by these people. You can't have any investments in these kinds of companies if you're a congressman or a senator. And I think they see their gravy train coming to an end if we don't keep sending weapons to Ukraine.
Very true. Let me ask you one last question with this, and then we'll take a turn south to Israel. If Ukraine goes on to lose this war against Russia, which I read an article from Time magazine, it was published just a day or two ago. The author was a gentleman named Simon Schuster, and he wrote like a 3,000-word essay for Time magazine where Zelensky has an almost messianic, we're going to defeat the Russians. And everybody around him is realizing, dude, this ain't happening.
Right.
Laying aside the devastation to Ukraine, its people, its land, its everything else, from the standpoint of the United States, what happens as far as our projection of power upon the world?
Well, there are some very good books. There's a trilogy of books by a guy named Peter Zeihan, Ziehan. He's a futurist. And not everything he predicts is right, but he's pretty well predicted, starting back around 2010, that the era of Bretton Woods is over. Now, for people who don't know, at the end of World War II, right before the war is ending, 44, 45, all these economic advisors, Harry Dexter White, John Maynard Keynes, all these people met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, a hotel. And they laid out the financial future of the world. It's not conspiratorial. It's more like planning. And they said, here's what we'll do. To prevent future wars, the U.S. will protect trade on the high seas and abroad. Obviously, you can't do that with Soviet Union or China. But in all the freer countries of the world, we will protect trade with our U.S. Navy. The dollar will be the world's currency, the denominator of the world's currency. And so everything will be denominated in dollars. And we will prevent wars by virtue of enhancing free trade and good relations between trade neighbors, kind of the old notion that if you have a Dell computer, was it Krugman that said that? If you had a Dell computer in any two countries, they won't go to war, which is nonsense. But nevertheless, it was this idea that the U.S. would support free trade worldwide, and in return, everybody else would kind of de-escalate. And that happened with Japan and the Philippines and many other places, and it worked for about 40 years. But we have seen the deterioration and the virtual end of Bretton Woods here in the last 15 years. Even before Donald Trump, it was already starting.
Sure.
People want to blame Trump for isolationism. It was already happening before Trump. Trump just accelerated it because he's riding the wave. He didn't cause the wave. He's riding the wave. He understands where it's going. So American power projection is never going to be back to where it was right after the Cold War, when we had an 800 ship Navy and more airplanes than you could park at 10 air bases. It's not going back to that. And our taxpayers are not going to support that size of a military. They're saying Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, you guys got to take care of some things yourself. Israel, Egypt. Israel, to my knowledge, has not requested support from the United States. And here we are trying to pass an Israel support bill. Well, why? They haven't requested it. They're a rich nation. Now, I firmly support selling them any weapons they want. I'd even give them a discount. But we don't need to give them aid. They're not asking for it, and they don't need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, again, beautiful turn to where we're going next, Israel. I get that Israel is an ally. I have no problem with the fact we are allied with Israel, although there are moments, as with any ally, you look at them and go, guys, are you really sure you ought to be doing this? I also get that they were attacked without provocation. That said, all of that said, and I'll couch it in the words of the era I grew up in. Can someone please explain to me what is the vital national security interest of the United States that demands that we put the blood and the treasure of this nation in the defense of a country that has a volunteer force right now of 350,000 men and probably one of the most advanced weapons systems and military in the world, maybe only second to us, and you can make an argument it's a close second. Why are we trying? Two carrier groups, the Eisenhower and the Ford, is now sitting in the East Mediterranean. We've got amphibious troops sitting off the shores of Israel, I guess waiting for a go sign. And not one address to the Congress by this administration justifying this is why we need to do this. So, what, again, almost the same question about Ukraine. Why are we all hot and bothered to go into Israel?
Well, and I think you can apply the same standard. Is Ukraine as a nation, is its existence in jeopardy? No. It may lose some territory that arguably it may not have been entitled to in the first place, but nobody thinks that Russians are going to go invade Kiev. And one of the reasons is they don't have the army to successfully police a nation in revolt against them. If you go back to the areas they controlled, Donbass and Crimea, these are Russian areas. They get those people to help police their own areas. So is Israel's existence at risk? No. But they are going to be paying a very heavy price from all of these attackers, assuming, of course, that the Iranians don't launch a massive all-out war against them. What is our national interest? None yet. That is, unless there's some international jihad where they say, we're going to come after you guys, which is really what they believe. But until they say that and they muster to do that, our national interest is to stand down, let the Israelis handle it, and they will, and don't get in their way when they are busy handling what they need to handle. Because if it were up to me, if I were the prime minister of Israel, I would go to that passage in the Bible where it deals with Jericho and Ai and say, Gaza. And I would encourage everybody to move out first, but I would just completely eliminate those areas.
Yeah, and to me, it's fascinating because the Israelis are almost in a position where they're damned if they do and damned if they don't internationally, politically, because nobody wants, and obviously, and what cracks me up in all this, and I want your take on this, everybody's saying, well, nation of Israel, don't be, slaughtering innocents. Really? Do you really think that after, 70 years of existence over in the Middle East that the Israelis are stupid enough to go wholesale slaughtering innocent Palestinians that are not a part of Hamas, knowing full well the retribution that they're going to get from Jordan, Syria, Egypt, and every other nation of the Middle East? That part always cracks me up. But the other part that gets me is this. It's like the Jordanians kicked the Palestinians out years ago. They don't want them back. The Egyptians have told the U.S., don't expect us to open up the Sinai Peninsula to them.
They did open the gate, though, today. They did open the gate today.
I stand corrected then. I was not aware of that. But up to now, they've been saying to everybody, well, they're not coming down here.
No.
And every other nation in the Middle East, which could open their arms to the Palestinians, are like, don't send them up here. Don't send them over to us. And it's just, so what are the Israelis supposed to do in this case? It's like they've got to defend themselves, but on the other hand, their hands are almost tied every time they go to try to do it.
I think ultimately, and who knows if they'll take this solution, but ultimately you cannot have a hostile foreign body sitting inside your nation as a bubbling cauldron that just wants to eliminate you. That
Mhm.
is not possible. You can't allow that to happen. And anywhere in history where you've seen that happen, it results in some sort of revolt, and eventually you get either independence or somebody wiped out. Those are the only two options there. So if I was Israel, I would begin a long-term policy of trying to move these people out to Egypt or some Muslim country where you share the Islamic values of the country in which you inhabit. And if you don't believe in Israel and the state of Israel, and you don't believe in democracy and all that kind of stuff, Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East, find someplace else to go. And we're seeing this play out here in America among American Jews who, and I had 3 stories in my news on, I think it was Monday, about Jews are starting to seriously look at their position in the Democrat Party because they realize that the Democrat Party is not going to stand up for them in these kinds of murderous, bloodlust attacks. The Democrats don't care. But at the same time, the Democrats are desperate to hang on to their votes, and they can't kowtow to the Jews, but they can't kowtow to the Arabs in America. And so this is going to be a very serious fracture point within the Democrat Party. And I would not be surprised if you don't see millions of people on each side, pro-Arab, pro-Israeli, just sit out the next election because they can't trust Rutabaga and they don't want to vote for Trump. So they'll just sit home.
You may very well be right on that point, because I read a really interesting article, and I wish I could remember the name of it, by the playwright David Mamet, talking about the origins of why it is that the Democratic Party, or should the Jewish people in America, support the Democratic Party the way that they do. And it's just, if I can find it, I'll email it
I
over to you.
saw that. I saw, but if you look at those 3 articles I cited on Monday, these are even better. And they
Okay.
get right down to the fact that for so long, Jews were hated and reviled and called dirty and all these other horrible things. And they've been bending over backwards to try and show how nice they are, how
Hmm.
tolerant they are, how loving they are. And that's that whole era of feelings, nothing more
Hmm.
than feelings, right?
Hmm.
And that puts them straight in the heart of the Democrat Party. But person after person in these articles said, well, I went, I woke up a liberal and I went to bed a conservative the other night, because they see where this heads. And you've got to pick a side, which is what concerns me about allowing in all of these, not just illegals, but so many Middle Eastern illegals, men who are taking over some of our larger communities like Dearborn and
Yeah.
Minneapolis. It's just
Hmm.
outrageous.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And folks, if you just happen to be stopping by and you've dropped in, my name's Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. This is Dr. Larry Schweikart. We are talking international history and politics. Going to turn domestic, because I've got to get your take on some of the events that have been going on in Congress the past few weeks. And let's start with the House, because for somebody like me who's followed politics most, if not all, my life, to watch what happened with the removal of now former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, I had to go looking up the motion to vacate just to see how many times it had ever been even either talked about and or employed. And until Gates pulled off what he did, it had only been done twice. Once was a threat, because Meadows did it in, I think, 2012, and then the speaker in the early part of the 20th century, I want to say it was Reed. I could be wrong about that. I know it was not canon, but I think it was Reed.
Mm-hmm.
What were your thoughts from a historian's perspective when you saw that the House exercised its option to remove, for the first time in its history, a sitting speaker?
Well, we removed a sitting speaker, but in 1859, they were so divided, they never even elected a speaker.
Oh my goodness.
Um, you know, people were talking about, well, they removed him without a plan. Oh, there's such chaos. I love chaos. I think change comes only from chaos. If you don't have some chaos in your life, you're never going to change. You get fat and comfortable, and nothing important happens. We had a period of 4 years from 1783 to 1787 where we didn't even have a president. We didn't have a Supreme Court. We had chaos, and it was marvelous, and it gave us a constitution. So I was probably the only one out there, and even Rich was saying, oh, this is chaotic. They should have known what they were doing before they kicked him out. No, sometimes you need to act on faith and assume that the chaos is going to produce a good result. And it did in this case. In fact, it may have produced a sea change, because not only do we have a very MAGA speaker, the most MAGA speaker in 7 years, but we also are seeing these termites, these people like Kay Granger and Ken Buck and all these rhinos who hate Trump leaving, announcing that they're not going to run again. And John O'Shea, Barris says that he's a shoo-in to take that seat, a MAGA guy replacing Kay Granger. So we may be seeing the early churn of a complete new wave of people. And Granger is very important. She's old, right? And so she represents that old guard, the Mitch McConnell, the Yertles, and the Nancy Pelosi's, the Botoxics, and all these old people in there who need to go. And B, she was chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee. Very, very important. I think Buck is on the Armed Services Committee. Very, very important. So you're seeing the leadership of a lot of these key committees that's going to be handed over to more MAGA young Turks. And I say good riddance. I'd be glad to see, a dozen more of these people go. I was very proud of Arizona back in 2022 as we elected 4 pretty MAGA people, and Gosar Biggs, Crane, and Debbie Lesko, who's retiring, but we'll probably get a good MAGA candidate there.
Now, for those of you out there who are hearing the good doctor throw around certain terminology that you may not otherwise be familiar with, I should probably get everyone up to speed and get you guys, or at least point you in the direction. Good doctor, where can people find this list of nicknames that you have tagged so many deservedly with?
Okay, so this is on my Twitter profile page. It's a pinned tweet. And I've recently added to the nicknames like Nancy Pelosi is Botoxic or Chris Christie is White Lizzo. I have added to it the names of certain cities, like Chicago is Benghazi by the lake, and Philadelphia is Kinshasa on the Delaware, and San Francisco is Groomer City. I think you have an older version of this. The newer version has some other names up there. Maybe not. Maybe it looks like it's okay. So, yeah, and part of this was devised years ago to keep out of Twitter jail, Twitmo. But I just kept it, and it just kind of grew. It's so much fun to deal with these names, and I do think so many of them are appropriate. Like Mitt Romney is Minion. This guy is absolutely the minion of the demonic forces on the Hill.
Oh, well, I don't disagree with that. I mean, you call Biden rutabaga. I refer to him as soft serve, which is more about the condition of his brains than it is how he likes to eat his ice cream. And you feel free to use it. I mean, rutabaga will work, but if you ever want something for variety, you can throw mine in there. But let's talk, going back to the House for a second. You mentioned that we now have a speaker that's more MAGA, more America first than we've had in a long time. I've heard some people argue he may be the most conservative speaker that we've had since Gingrich. What are your thoughts so far on Mike Johnson?
Yeah, so far he's been exceptionally good. Didn't like a couple of things he said about Ukraine aid, but so far what he's proposing in terms of budgets and advancing is really good. I like the way they tied together the Israel aid package with the reduction in the IRS jobs. So we got to pay for it somehow. And of course, Rutabaga said he's going to veto this, to which I say, fine with me. Shut down government. Don't spend any money. As long as there is no money being spent, as long as what they used to say about no man is safe while Congress is in session. And that's fine with me. So I think actually the Republicans finally have some leverage in that Rutabaga can't get anything he wants to do in terms of spending real money. Yeah, he's got executive orders and he's got a few things he can do that way, but he can't spend real money unless he gets the House on board, and the House won't be on board unless you cut certain things and add certain things. So let's see where this ends up. I spoke to Andy Biggs just before the 2022 election. I said, you realize you guys are going to win, and then you're going to have a problem, because the only two things you'll possibly be able to do, they're not going to take any bills you pass and get them through the Senate, let alone get them by Rutabaga. So you can either impeach him, which will go nowhere because the Senate's not going to convict him, or you can shut down the government. I said, are you guys ready to do that? And he hemmed and hawed, but I could tell that they weren't ready to shut down the government because of the 1995 fiasco with Gingrich. If Gingrich had just held on and held out, the House today would be such a powerful tool. But as it is, it's fairly emasculated because it just keeps passing these continuing resolutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting period. And we talked about a little bit backstage. I want to get your take on something broader than the House, but to the Republican Party as an institution in general. And we talked about it briefly backstage that I'm of the opinion, and given your knowledge of history, I really want your take on this. We are at an inflection point, a sea change, not just generationally, but ideologically. And this is sort of going to bleed into the questions I've got about your take on the presidential election. There's two wings to the Republican Party right now that I could see. One of them is the old guard establishment Republicans, which is to me identified in McCarthy, Paul Ryan, McConnell, Minion, Mitt Romney, others that
Marco
are
Rubio, Lindsey Graham, Tim Scott,
Yeah,
Nick
exactly.
Paduak, Give a Yucca Bomb, Haley.
Yeah, really. Yeah, that woman's just like Lindsey Graham. She ain't never seen a war she didn't want to get somebody else's kids killed in. So you've got that. They've got control of the institutions. They've got control of the money, everything else. On the other side of that, you have a more populist, conservative, younger, more aggressive strain of republicanism, if I may use that term, that is coming up. That fight is not just embodied inside the Republican Party, but inside what's going to be the presidential election when Biden and Trump go to round two. But just speaking strictly about the Republican Party, where do you see this fight headed and who wins? I mean, is it going to be a thing where conservative populists win by attrition because, daggone it, Granger, McConnell, and they're just getting old, they're going to get out? Or is the establishment wing of the party going to exercise whatever power and dominance it has? Like, look, you young bucks over there, your day will come, but we're still in control. We're going to be in control. We'll still decide the direction of this party. Where does the Republican Party go from here, not just now, but even post-Trump?
Well, if you can cut off that giant funding wing that Yertle controlled in 2022, where he shut down a lot of the more MAGA, the more conservative senators, and basically, helped kill Masters and his race in Arizona. Probably hurt Oz in Pennsylvania. I don't know if he could have won, but he had a chance if he'd had more money.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Once you separate out that money, things change a lot. Now, the donors may be ideologically one way, but in terms of their pocketbooks, they're not idiots. And they want to be on the winning side eventually. And they'll support losers like DeSantis. They'll support DeSantis until they can't support him anymore. And then they're going to have to go somewhere. And it's either going to be Trump or Rutabaga. And they're going to go with Trump sooner or later, just as they did in 2016. I don't see a whole lot of young bloods coming up who are of the old neocon stripe. I think, Scott is probably one of the younger ones, but you don't have a whole lot of those people. And so really what you have is a wing of republicanism that goes all the way back to Lincoln and is very consistent in terms of money for internal improvements, spend money on infrastructure, high tariffs, keep American jobs at home, make sure that American factories and industry work. Somewhat isolationist, and this goes back to Zehan and his end of Bretton Woods, which is already upon us. You're not going to go back to the Cold War. We got to protect every place all the time. So it's not going to happen. So in terms of personnel, I don't see too many more of the non-MAGA people coming out. For example, here in Arizona, we had Karen Taylor Robeson, who was kind of more of that McConnell-McCain line, and she got beat in the primaries. And the Republicans here, the McCain wing, threw a hissy fit, and they wouldn't vote for Lake in the general. We had a treasurer who was kind of more of the rhino stock, Kimberly Yee, and she got 100,000 more votes than did Carrie Lake. Who are those 100,000 people? The McCain people. They voted for Yee, but they wouldn't vote for Carrie Lake. Carrie Lake lost by 30,000 votes, even with the fraud. She would have won even with the fraud had the McCain people just not been such jerkweeds. So I think we're seeing that everywhere. People like Byron Donalds, people like J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is probably the next Trump in waiting. He has a very strong career ahead of him. And if we can just find more people like that who are solid, MAGA has a very bright future.
If I had my way about J.D. Vance, it'd be Trump's Veep, but that's just me, and I've got a ton of reasons we could get into sometime for that one. But let me ask you a question, pulling back a little bit. I can remember reading from many a history book the stories about one man walks on the Senate floor, has a cane, and proceeds to just beat the living crap out of a guy. And a lot has been made of the era in which we find ourselves, and that's this. Our politics is extraordinarily uncivil. Of course, you can make an argument it always is. We're just paying more attention to the incivility. But there's a coarseness to the American way of life right now. A lot of people are likening it to pre-Civil War, 1855, 1859. When you pull back and you look at the totality of the nation, not just in its political discourse, but culturally, everything, is that a fair comparison historically to where we are right now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we had a period, people mostly don't remember this, but we had a period when senators went armed onto the floor of the U.S. Senate all the time. That Preston Brooks walked in. He was a congressman. He walked into the Senate and beat Senator Charles Sumner almost to death with a cane. Duels were routinely fought over honor. Two guys got in a fight on the Arkansas House of Representatives floor, and one pulled out a Bowie knife and gutted the other one. So we're in verbal terms very much back to that. Now, a couple of things have happened. First is that ever since, I really credit Rush Limbaugh with a lot of this. Ever since Rush Limbaugh, we had a different viewpoint in the public sphere that was finally put out there that captured perhaps half of Americans' views. And that had been suppressed for many years. Reagan got too much of that, but got too very much of that. I don't want to say got too much of it. He got at very much of that, but nothing really got it like Rush did when he could appeal nationally to 20 million people in the course of a week and outline the feelings and the views of really a new age. The other thing is that I would argue the Democrats are reverting to form. They are reverting to who they were before the Civil War, which is the party of slavery, the party of death. The Democrats, people, if you don't know this, read my book, 7 Events That Made America America, chapter 1. That's all you need. The Democrats were founded for one reason only, to protect slavery. Jesus said you cannot get good fruit from a bad tree. The Democrats are a bad tree. They've always been a bad tree. They can't be a good tree. They can't give any good fruit. So I think they're reverting to form. They're becoming highly, highly ideological and criminal at the same time, which is really what they always were. It takes a certain type of criminal to enslave another man and keep him in bondage. Really, when it's clear to the rest of the country that this is not right. You know, our founders. Just one more word on this. Our founders did not put slavery in the Constitution. It is not in the Constitution. The word is unfree persons. Emphasis on persons. The founders understood that black people were people, not property. And once the Whigs, then the Republicans, the anti-slave forces got a hold of that idea. Wait a minute, we're dealing with people, not property. It's about definitions. Once they got a hold of that, slavery's days in America were numbered, because you can't argue property over people. You'll lose that argument every time.
Very, very true. Very true. As we start to bring this thing in for a landing, since we're sort of been touching on the question of round 2, Trump versus Biden, got to ask you about this. And you know, some days I wonder if I watch American politics because I enjoy watching a train wreck or because I believe there's actually some hope. But I got to ask you, on a serious note, everything that went down in 2020, or as some people might call it, the election fornication that took place, with the upcoming presidential election, we're now literally about a year and 4 days away, which is astounding when I stop thinking about it. How more or less worried are you about the upcoming election, given everything that happened in 2020, the subsequent months after, and all the years after? Because you know the Democrats are coming with everything they've got left in the bag. Will they be able to do everything they did in 2020? Probably not, but you know they're not going to go quietly into the night.
Well, I think they put an awful lot on lawfare, or indict fair, as I call it, and keeping Trump off the ballot. And I think they figured out quite recently, in the last 2 months, that ain't going to work, that they appear to be quite unsuccessful in keeping him off the ballot. And even if he were in jail, he would run from jail when they're not going to put him in jail. That's stupid. What are you going to do to the Secret Service agents? Where are you going to put them? You're going to get a whole separate federal prison, so you have all these Secret Service agents, so they have to be maintained. It's just nonsense. It's not going to happen. But if they want to go ahead and put him in jail, I would love to see them swear in President Trump from jail, and then his first official act is, and I hereby pardon myself, and that's the end. And then he goes after him. I think they know this time he's not going to let it ride like he did with Hillary. I think this time they know he's going to come after them hammer and tong. And when I pray not only that God brings him back into office, but that he brings with him 50 mighty men, a Terminex van, and a flamethrower, because I want him to clean house and just Jericho these people. I mean, seriously, finish them off. So what optimism do I have? Number one, in 2020, they had 5 months of absentee ballots to criminally inflate. We saw the 2,000 mules. They had 5 months of that. They're not going to have that this time. They might get a month max. Trump lost in 2020, even if you buy the 81 million votes, which I don't, but even if you buy that, he only lost the Electoral College by 200,000 votes in 5 states. So once you take out those 5 months of fallacious ballots, you probably got those 5 states, or at least enough of them, back to win the Electoral College. Second, in 2020, Trump did not lead in a single national poll.
True.
He leads in almost every poll. There was one out today with Biden up 7, then another one came out with Trump up 2 or 3. But the overall majority of the polls show Trump up anywhere from 2 to 5 points. And that's nationally. When you look at the state polls, Trump is running away with the swing states sometimes. And I don't believe all these. I think they're inflated too high on Trump's side. But some of them say 7 points, some say 5 points. Barris has a margin of fraud that he puts at about 1.5 points. If Trump's above 1.5 points in any of these states, I think he wins. Third, the nature of the issues, as I mentioned with the illegal stuff will be issue number one for 2024. It is becoming so overwhelming, even in the blue cities. I saw today there was a meeting of 5 blue city mayors with Rutabaga begging him to stop this. And he won't stop. He can't stop. That's who he is destroying America. That's what he's all about. He hates America for whatever reason. I don't know what America did to this evil guy to make him hate the country so much, but every single act he takes is something that hurts America. So I think that with the issues, particularly the economy and the illegals, you're going to have millions of Democrat voters either vote Trump, vote Bobby, or just sit out. And however that works out, that works, I think, to Trump's benefit. So just in those 3 ways, I have great optimism for 2024, not only being a victory, but being a fairly significant victory. And if things continue to shift, it could be an enormous victory.
Yeah, I'm seeing stuff on, Barris is obviously the undisputed master of his profession. I mean, I look at an election, I drive through a town, I see who's got the most yard signs out, and I see who's walking the most on behalf of a candidate. I could probably give you a feel for what's going on. Barris can get it right down to like almost like splitting an atom. He can be that precise. But the things that I'm noticing just from my side of it, and I'll take your observations on this. Trump gets indicted in Atlanta, and his motorcade is driving through poor African American neighborhoods in Atlanta, and you got African Americans just cheering his motorcade on. I'm like, what in the world is that? I mean, not that I don't think African Americans couldn't support a Republican like Donald Trump, but Trump, and again, feel free to disagree with me on this point if you want. The Republican Party has an enormous problem post-Trump. There is, I will argue, an illusion that Republican leadership is living under. They think, people are supporting Donald Trump. That means they like us. No, they don't like you. They like Trump.
Right.
And that to me is going to be the great test post-Trump. What does this party turn into? And I think you're right. I think it's going to move in the direction of a more populist, conservative, sort of America first general direction. But let me ask you this. The results of the election, and this is prognostication more than anything else. If Biden wins, and again, I'm not trying to be partisanly apocalyptic here, but if Biden should win a second term, what does America look like?
I think that the horror is too great to contemplate. If Biden wins again, literally the United States is finished. And I've never said that before. I didn't say it with Obama. I didn't say it with Clinton. And it's done if Obama wins. No, but at the rate he's destroying America with his policies, we would probably be a rump nation of a group of southern, western, southeastern states that were productive, fairly healthy, economically vibrant, and then the rest of the country would be similar to what we're seeing in New York, Minneapolis, Benghazi by the Lake, Groomer City, New Calcutta, LA, all these places, just full of homeless, illegal immigrants, drug addicts, and crime.
All right, now let me flip that over. If Trump wins a second non-consecutive term, what does the country look like at the end of 4 years?
I think that's going to depend a lot on who he brings in with him. If he brings in people like 50 Steve Bannons, without the leaking, 50 Steve Bannons who are absolutely committed to cleaning out the swamp. If we have, which I think we will have, a Republican House, and as of right now, a long way to go, but as of right now, we'd have a 50-50 Senate at worst. Mm-hmm. He could get some stuff through. You're not going to get 60 votes in the Senate of MAGA. So look at what vote we had here just today. What was it? 85 to 11, 86 to 11 on withdrawing troops from Niger. Why in the world do we need troops in Niger? Yet you had 85 or 86 senators who said, oh, no, keep the troops in Niger. So I think you've got right now a rump of about 11 or 12 MAGA type Republicans in the Senate you can count on most of the time. Not all the time, most of the time.
Sure.
What does the party look like after Trump? Assuming that he's as successful in 4 years as he was in his first 3 years, I think somebody like a J.D. Vance could run and win a fairly solid electoral college victory. Would Vance be able to pull in the blacks that Trump attracts or the Hispanics? I don't know. And just nominating a black person like Tim Scott, well, he'll attract blacks.
No.
That's nonsense.
No.
Tim Scott does not attract the African American vote, any more than Arnold Schwarzenegger attracts the Austrian vote. I mean, it's just nonsense, right? So that we need to get out of this. We really have a color-oriented lens when we look at people and say, well, Tim Scott's black, he'll attract black voters. Crazy. You need someone who speaks to black voters no matter what color they are. Somebody like Trump. Can Vance do that? I don't know. Maybe.
Well, just since you brought up Vance, I'll give you my 30,000-foot pitch. If it were me and I were Trump, I'd take Vance as the VP. Here's why. Number one, he comes out of almost that same ideological mold as Trump. Maybe not on every issue, but they can agree enough. He'd be a whole lot more loyal than Pence was to Trump.
True.
The second thing is, Trump's going to need somebody to succeed him because he'll do everything he can in 4 years. But there's just some stuff you've got to have the Congress pass laws, and they're going to wait him out. If you take a J.D. Vance and he were to get elected, he could continue on what Trump had started in the second term. But the other thing is this: Vance comes out of Southern Ohio. He is hillbilly elegy. He can speak to non-college educated whites. He can speak to African Americans. He can speak to Hispanics. But on the other hand, he's educated Ivy League, Wall Street, served former military. Vance has the potential to put the Republican Party together. I could make an argument even better than Donald Trump could right now if he's got the seasoning. Now, I know what the objection is going to be. Well, he's barely been in American politics. So was Trump.
So was Obama.
Does that make?
Obama
so was Obama
for 2 years.
Exactly.
Here's the thing about Vance, and I love J.D. Vance, and as a former Ohioan, I would have loved to have voted for him. But when you get into a presidential election, you need someone who can, you hope, do two things. One, be a fire insurance policy so they don't dare take you out, because it's what Kamala Harris is right now. They can't get rid of Rutabaga because she is so horrible. Even the Democrats don't want her, which is why he's still in office. So you need a fire insurance policy. You need a guy who's so loyal, you don't dare. It's what they thought about Teddy Roosevelt, right? Let's put him in a place where he can't do any damage. But the other thing is, you want to try to get somebody who will bring in votes that you can't otherwise attract, either regionally or ideologically. And I don't know that Vance does that for Trump.
Okay.
I would like to see somebody from Arizona, but as I say, I have a problem with Lake in that she just didn't win, and
Right.
therefore her attraction in Arizona isn't yet proven. DeSantis was never very popular for me, even before he did all this stuff, because he's not bringing anything to Trump that Trump doesn't already have, namely Florida and that whole vote. People had talked about Kristi Noem. Well, as we now know, there was a good reason Trump didn't jump on her bandwagon very close, because he knew what Corey Lewandowski was up to. So somebody will emerge. There will be somebody who will emerge who will be Trump's fire insurance policy, but who will also bring something to the table that Vance can't. And I don't see anything wrong with a Senator Vance running for president in 28. That would be fine. I do think he's probably the heir apparent. I don't think Trump's next vice president will be the heir apparent.
Very true. Very altogether possible. Let me ask you one last question, and we'll go ahead and bring it in for a landing. Regardless of the outcome of this election, going forward, because Trump's going to pass from the political scene. Biden's going to pass from the political scene. The current generation that of leadership we have is going to pass from the scene more quickly, I think, than people realize. Where do you see the country, I don't know, let's just say 10 years out, ideologically, culturally, spiritually?
I think the best predictor of this is Jean Tweng's book, Generations. She's done some incredible, something like 59 million surveys of all these generations, and she can tell you where what she calls the iGen, Gen X, and people like that are now, which is kind of where they're probably going to be in 10 or 15 years. I do think there's going to have to be both an educational and a spiritual reawakening for them to understand that. Here's one of my hobby horses, my pet peeves, is this notion that work needs to be meaningful. No, work is work. It's the reason God said to Adam in the Bible, I'm going to curse you, you're going to have to work. And play is play. And for almost 30, 40 years now, we've been trying to tell young people, well, your work needs to be meaningful. You need to enjoy your work. And even Rush used to say, well, find something you love. Well, unfortunately, Rush, 99% of the population can't do what they really love, which is why you work 5 days a week so you can do what you really love. And I mean, if I was doing what I really, really, really loved, I'd still be playing drums at 70 years old up there with Mick Jagger and these people, right? So we need to rearrange that thinking and get people back to understanding that work is work, and what you love to do or what you love to support is separate from your work. And you need to do a good job at work to make sure that you get to have the money to play.
Well, there you go. Dr. Schweikart, this has been absolutely a blast. And like I said, I've been doing this now for just a few months, and I've been following your work now for a number of years. Ruben and Chad has been following you even longer than that. On behalf of everybody on the Electronic Front Porch, I want to thank you for stopping by and having a conversation with us tonight. And I know you have 1,000,001 platforms you can go on, but you're always welcome back here anytime you want. Just shoot me an email and say, hey, I got something burning on the brain I want to talk about. Like, come on.
Well, let's talk about the new book when it comes out of
Oh,
Patriots
yes,
History
sir.
Globalism.
Yes, sir. You got a new book coming out. Let's give everybody the title, and then also where can people find you on social media? Because man, you are Mr. Worldwide. Forget Pitbull. You are like Mr. Worldwide when it comes to social media. So where can people find you? Tell them about the book.
Okay, so I'm at Larry Schweikart, just my name as it's spelled here with no space, at Larry Schweikart on Twitter. I'm at the Wild World of History.com. I have a history curriculum website for all you homeschoolers or educators. I have a full course in U.S. history that tracks to Patriots history of the United States, and I teach every chapter in video. I have a full course in world history with Patriots History of the Modern World, and I teach every unit in video. We just launched wildworldofpolitics.com, where I talk about politics 3 days a week in short segments, and I have ongoing longer video series. My most recent one is Globalism, Then and Now. And then I write regularly on Substack. Just look me up on Substack. I put an article out today on Bootgate. And then finally, the new book is A Patriot's History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline. That's coming out from Skyhorse with Steve Bannon's War Room behind it. And that will be out on February 20th. And I think it's going to be big. Every one of my books isn't huge, but I think that one's going to be big.
Well, we're definitely going to have you back on. If you're willing to do it, we'll love to have you back on here in February and talk about it, because that is a topic right now. And I don't think until Trump came along, people quite crystallized their understanding of what globalism is doing to the nation. Everybody thought that Ross Perot, the giant sucking sound going down in Mexico, that's just hyperbole. Oh no, say what you want to about Perot, and God knows people will, but he understood very full well what NAFTA was going to do. He understood what trade deals like that would do. And only now, when you had a taste of what could be yet again in Trump's 4 years, people are like, this globalism thing kind of sucks. So yeah, let's get back together in February. Definitely have you back on. We'll talk about the book. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, any parting words for folks who might be watching tonight?
I will be at the great homeschool conventions, all 5 of them next year, starting in March in St. Louis, Greenville, Austin, Ontario, California, and Cincinnati. I will also be at the Florida Educator Homeschool Convention in Orlando, and I will be at another Texas convention in Fort Worth. So I am at all these homeschool conventions. I usually give a talk at every one, so feel free to come by and we'll chat and bring your books to be autographed.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, again, folks, my name is Brian Tripp, and I'm the Front Porch Conservative. This is America's history professor, Dr. Larry Schweikart. I want to thank him for stopping by. I want to thank you for stopping by. If you're not a subscriber to my channel, please consider giving me a sub. I'll take all the help I can get. Dr. Schweikart, hang on for just a second. We'll say some proper goodbyes. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back on Saturday with Front Porch Brunch, our weekly review of the news. We'll be back with more videos later this week. So once again, thanks for stopping by. We'll see everybody later.